The transport shuttle glided silently into the docking bay of Galactic Academy Station, its metal surface gleaming under the artificial lights. As the airlock hissed open, dozens of alien beings stepped out on the platform. There were tall, graceful creatures with silver skin and long limbs, others that looked like walking crystals catching light with every movement, and some covered in thick armor plating that made them look like living tanks. Among all these impressive aliens walked David Thompson, a 20-year-old human from Earth. He looked completely ordinary next to his new classmates. Average height, brown hair, wearing the same standard uniform as everyone else. Most of the other recruits didn't even glance his way as they moved through the station's corridors. Instructor Veltar, a creature with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors when he was annoyed, was checking his datapad as the new students passed by. His colleague, Commander Zeph, leaned over to look at the list of new arrivals. "Look at this," Veltar muttered, pointing to David's file. "Another one from that little rock, called Earth. Third outer spiral arm, barely discovered space travel 50 years ago. Why do we even accept applications from these primitive worlds?" Commander Zeph shrugged with all 6 of his shoulders. "Academy policy says we have to give everyone a chance. Though I can't imagine what these humans think they can contribute to galactic defense." David had been assigned to share quarters with Thokran, a massive Krogan warrior whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and combat skills. Thokran stood over 7 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they could crush steel. His skin was naturally armored, and his people came from a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived. During their first training session together, Thokran easily lifted weights that would challenge most species. He moved through combat drills with the grace of a natural predator. When it was David's turn, the humans seemed to struggle with basic exercises that should have been simple for any spacefaring species. "Is this normal gravity for you?" David asked, bouncing slightly on his feet. The station maintained what was considered standard gravity across most civilized worlds, but to David, it felt like he was walking on the moon. Thokran laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "This is light gravity. Human, my home world has 3 times this pull. How did your people ever leave their planet if they cannot handle standard conditions?" The other cadets began to gather around, watching David attempt the obstacle course that was designed to challenge the galaxy's best young warriors. There were walls to climb, barriers to leap over, and sections that required perfect balance and timing. Most species needed multiple attempts to complete it successfully. David approached the first wall, jumped, and grabbed the top edge. He pulled himself up with what looked like minimal effort, though he appeared to be trying hard. The watching aliens expected him to struggle with the next section, where cadets had to leap across a gap that had challenged even the athletic Altarians. Instead, David sailed across the gap with room to spare, landing softly on the other side. He completed the balance beam section without a single wobble, moved through the strength challenges without breaking a sweat, and finished the entire course in a time that would have been respectable for a Krogan warrior. "Must be beginner's luck," whispered one of the crystalline Nexary cadets. No way a primitive species can actually be that capable. During their first academic class, David mentioned some details about his home planet. "Back on Earth, we have these storms called hurricanes," he said casually. "Winds can reach over 200 miles per hour, and they can level entire cities if people don't take shelter." The class fell silent. Most of their homeworld experienced weather, but nothing that destructive occurred naturally on civilized planets. "And then there are tornadoes," David continued, not noticing the shocked expressions around him. "Those are like spinning columns of air that can pick up houses and throw them around." "Oh." "And we have these things called earthquakes, where the ground literally shakes and cracks open." Instructor Veltar's skin had turned a pale yellow, which indicated confusion among the species. "Surely you exaggerate. Cadet Thompson, no planet with such conditions could support intelligent life." David shrugged. "I guess we just learned to deal with it. My hometown gets hit by tornadoes every few years. You just build storm shelters and hope for the best." The other students exchanged glances. Either this human was telling incredible lies, or his species came from conditions that would be considered uninhabitable by galactic standards. Given how primitive Earth was supposed to be, lying seemed more likely. As the days passed, More strange things became apparent about the human students. They seemed unusually calm during emergency drills that left other species panicking. They recovered quickly from injuries that would hospitalize most beings for weeks. And they kept mentioning these bizarre creatures from their homeworld with a casual attitude that suggested they were completely normal. "We have these animals called sharks," David told his study group one evening. "They're basically swimming killing machines with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Some of them grow over 20 feet long. And people share the same waters with these predators?" asked an Altarian cadet, her elegant features showing horror. "Oh, sure," David replied cheerfully. "Surfing and swimming are pretty popular sports. The sharks usually leave you alone if you don't bother them." The alien students were beginning to suspect that either humans were the greatest liars in the galaxy, or something was very wrong with the official reports about Earth. By the third week at Galactic Academy Station, something was clearly different about the human cadets, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. The first major incident happened during what the instructors called Stress Protocol 7, a combat simulation designed to push cadets to their absolute limits. The exercise took place in a sealed chamber where the atmospheric pressure was cranked up to dangerous levels. The temperature swung between freezing and scorching every few minutes, and the lighting flickered randomly to simulate battlefield conditions. Loud, jarring sounds blasted from speakers to create maximum psychological pressure. Most species found the combination overwhelming. Cadet Zillera from the Crystal World started hyperventilating within minutes. Her normally beautiful, transparent skin turned cloudy with stress, and she had to be carried out by medical staff. Thokran, the mighty Krugan warrior, lasted longer but eventually collapsed when his nervous system couldn't handle the constant environmental changes. One by one, cadets from across the galaxy succumbed to panic attacks, stress-induced seizures, or simply fainted from the overwhelming sensory assault. The medical bay filled up with students suffering from what the doctors called acute stress response syndrome. David Thompson walked out of the chamber looking like he'd just finished a mild workout. He wasn't even breathing hard. When instructor Veltar asked him about the experience, David just shrugged and said, "It was okay, I guess. Kind of reminded me of working construction during summer back home in Texas." Lieutenant Jake Wilson, another human who had arrived at the academy a semester earlier, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, the heat cycles weren't too bad. Felt like being in the engine room of the cargo ship I used to work on." The medical staff ran every test they could think of on the human cadets. Their heart rates had barely elevated during the simulation. Their stress hormones remained at normal levels. Their brain scans showed the same calm patterns they displayed during regular activities. It was as if the conditions that had hospitalized dozens of other species were just another Tuesday for these humans. Dr. Kethera, the station's chief medical officer, pulled up David's file and stared at it for the 100th time. According to every database in the galactic network, humans were supposed to be a fragile species from a peaceful world. Yet here was evidence that contradicted everything in their records. The next incident happened during routine atmospheric training. The Academy regularly tested different environmental conditions to prepare cadets for missions on various worlds. Section C was being used to simulate the atmosphere of Rex Prime, a hostile world where the air contained compounds that were toxic to most life forms. A malfunction in the containment system caused Rexian gas to leak into the training area. Alarms blared throughout the station as emergency protocols activated. Cadets scrambled for breathing equipment, while automated systems tried to contain the leak. The gas was deadly to most known species. Even brief exposure could cause respiratory failure, organ damage, and death within minutes. Emergency teams rushed to evacuate everyone from the affected area. Everyone except David, who was still running laps around the track, apparently unaware that anything was wrong. "Cadet Thompson, evacuate immediately," shouted Commander Zeph through the intercom system. David looked up, confused. "Is something happening, sir? The air you're breathing right now could kill you in minutes." David took a deep breath and seemed to consider this. "Feels fine to me, sir. Smells a bit like sulfur, but it's not worse than being near a paper mill back home." The medical team had to physically drag David out of the contaminated area. They ran every test they could think of, expecting to find signs of poisoning, cellular damage, or at least some indication that the toxic atmosphere had affected him. His blood work came back completely normal. His lung function was perfect. There wasn't a single sign that he'd been exposed to anything more dangerous than regular air. Dr. Cathera called an emergency meeting with the senior staff. Either our sensors are completely wrong about the toxicity of Rection gas, or these humans are biologically impossible. The weirdness didn't stop there. During hand-to-hand combat training, something even stranger became apparent. The Academy used controlled sparring matches to teach cadets how to handle physical confrontations. Safety protocols ensured that while the training was realistic, serious injuries were rare. David's first sparring partner was a Nexury warrior whose crystalline fists could crack steel. The alien landed several solid hits that should have broken human bones. David barely seemed to notice. He kept fighting with the same casual attitude he showed during regular exercises. "Did that hurt?" asked the confused Nexury after landing what should have been a devastating blow to David's ribs. "A little," David admitted, "about like getting tackled during football practice back in high school." Instructor Veltar watched the sparring match with growing alarm. He'd seen the force measurements from those hits. They should have sent David to the medical bay with multiple fractures. Instead, the human was still standing, still fighting, and still acting like nothing significant had happened. Even more disturbing was David's reaction speed. Humans were supposed to be slow compared to most galactic species. Their reflexes were listed in the database as adequate for basic tasks but insufficient for high-level combat operations. David was moving faster than species that were supposedly far superior. He blocked strikes that should have been impossible for him to see coming. He countered attacks with precision that suggested reflexes operating at the very limits of what biology should allow. After the training session, the instructors huddled together, voices hushed with concern. "Something's wrong with the human classification data," Commander Zeph whispered. "Either they're not what our records say they are, or we've seriously misunderstood something about their species." Instructor Veltar's skin had turned the deep purple that indicated serious worry among his people. "I'm beginning to think we need to take a much closer look at this planet called Earth." The piercing wail of emergency sirens cut through the quiet night cycle aboard Galactic Academy Station like a knife. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow as automated voices announced in dozens of languages that a critical system failure was occurring in the Eastern Wing. 12 cadets from various species had been studying late in Section 7 when the cascade failure began. What started as a minor power fluctuation quickly spiraled into complete chaos as multiple systems began failing one after another. The section's blast doors automatically sealed to prevent the emergency from spreading to other parts of the station, trapping everyone inside. Lieutenant Jake Wilson looked up from his tactical studies as the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "Well, this can't be good," he muttered, his calm human voice cutting through the immediate panic that erupted from his alien classmates. The life support systems went haywire first. The atmospheric processors, designed to maintain perfect environmental conditions, began venting random mixtures of gases. One moment the air was thick with methane that burned the lungs. The next it was flooded with chlorine compounds that would dissolve most organic tissue. The oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, then spiked so high that a single spark could turn the entire section into an inferno. Temperature control failed spectacularly. The heating systems went into overdrive, pushing the air temperature to nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit before suddenly cutting out completely. Within minutes, the temperature plummeted toward freezing as the station's outer hull began radiating heat into the vacuum of space. Cadet Zilera, whose crystalline body was particularly sensitive to temperature changes, began developing visible cracks across her transparent skin. "We're going to die in here," she whimpered, her voice taking on a high-pitched tone that indicated extreme distress in her species. "The temperature swings will shatter my molecular structure." Thakran, the mighty Krugan warrior who had seemed invincible during training, was gasping for breath as the atmospheric changes overwhelmed his respiratory system. His normally gray skin had turned an alarming shade of blue, and his massive frame was shaking as his body tried to adapt to conditions that were killing him by degrees. The gravity generators joined the chaos, creating a nightmare landscape of changing forces. One corner of the room suddenly experienced crushing gravity that would flatten most beings into paste. A few feet away, zero gravity left cadets floating helplessly, unable to control their movement as they bounced off walls and ceilings. The gravitational field shifted randomly, creating invisible barriers and deadly zones throughout their prison. Emergency lighting flickered on and off sporadically, creating a strobe effect that disoriented everyone and made it nearly impossible to see where the dangers were. Sometimes they had a few seconds of dim illumination to assess their situation. Then they would be plunged back into absolute darkness where a single wrong step could mean death. "Stay calm, everyone." David Thompson's voice cut through the panic with surprising authority. While his alien classmates were succumbing to terror and environmental shock, he seemed to be thinking clearly and assessing their situation like a puzzle to be solved rather than a death trap. "Jake, can you help me get the injured over to that alcove near the far wall?" David called out to his fellow human. "It looks like the gravitational distortions aren't as severe over there, and the temperature seems more stable." Jake nodded and began carefully making his way through the chaos. The two humans moved with a confidence that seemed impossible under the circumstances. They navigated around the crushing gravity zones by feel, avoided the worst of the atmospheric contamination by timing their movements with the ventilation cycles, and somehow kept their footing even when the deck plating buckled from thermal expansion. One by one, David and Jake began gathering their injured classmates. Zillera's crystalline form was deteriorating rapidly, stress fractures spreading across her body like spider webs. David picked her up as gently as possible, cradling her fragile frame as he carried her to safety. The toxic atmosphere that was burning her cellular structure seemed to have no effect on him at all. Thakran, despite his massive size and warrior training, had collapsed as his body shut down from environmental stress. Jake managed to drag the 7-foot alien to the relatively safe zone, moving through conditions that should have killed any biological creature within minutes. "How are you doing this?" gasped Cadet Mortek, a reptilian being whose scales were blistering from the temperature extremes. The atmospheric readings showed toxic levels that would kill most species in seconds. David paused in his rescue efforts, genuinely puzzled by the question. "It's not that bad, really. Reminds me of working in the sulfur mines back in Wyoming. The heat's about like being in a foundry, and the air quality isn't much worse than Mexico City during smog season." The alien cadets stared at him in horror. What David was describing as mildly unpleasant working conditions were environmental hazards that required specialized equipment and safety protocols on most civilized worlds. As the emergency continued, David became the de facto leader of their survival efforts. He organized a group in the safest area he could find, rationed what little breathable air they had access to, and somehow managed to jury-rig a basic filtration system using components from their study equipment. "The hull breach is small," he reported after venturing into areas where the others couldn't survive. "If we can redirect some of the emergency power to seal it, the atmospheric processors might stabilize." "That section is in hard vacuum," protested Cadet Yelnov, whose species required environmental suits for even minor atmospheric variations. "Nothing can survive exposure to space." David shrugged. "I'll hold my breath." He disappeared into the darkness, moving through areas where the hull had been breached and the atmosphere was venting into space. The other cadets listened in amazed silence as they heard him working, apparently unaffected by conditions that would instantly kill most forms of life. When he returned 20 minutes later, the emergency systems were beginning to stabilize. The temperature swings were moderating. The toxic atmosphere was slowly being filtered out, and the gravity generators were returning to normal function. "That should hold until the rescue teams can get through the blast doors," David announced, sitting down casually as if he just finished fixing a minor plumbing problem rather than preventing a catastrophic disaster. The alien cadets looked at him with expressions ranging from awe to terror. They were beginning to realize that their understanding of humans was fundamentally wrong, and the implications of that realization were starting to sink in. As David Thompson continued organizing their survival in the damaged section, his casual remarks about the deadly conditions around them began to paint a picture that terrified his alien classmates more than the emergency itself. "You know, this toxic vapor isn't too bad once you get used to it," David commented while dragging an unconscious Altarian cadet through a corridor where the air was thick with caustic chemicals that were eating holes in the metal walls. Reminds me of those sulfur caves we used to explore in Yellowstone when I was a kid. My scout troop would spend whole weekends camping near the geysers. Jake Wilson nodded while helping position their makeshift shelter. Yeah, and that gravity surge we felt earlier was just like deep-sea diving. My uncle used to take me down to about 300 feet off the coast back home. You get that same feeling of pressure trying to crush your chest. The alien cadets exchanged horrified glances. Deep-sea diving was considered an extreme sport requiring specialized equipment, even among the most advanced civilizations. The idea that humans did it recreationally, with children no less, was beyond their comprehension. Wait, interrupted Cadet Mortek, his reptilian features showing confusion. You mean your species voluntarily exposes offspring to crushing pressure environments for entertainment? Well, sure, Jake replied, checking the stability of the shelter. My little sister got her diving certification when she was 12. Pretty standard stuff back home. Zilera, whose crystalline form was still showing stress fractures from the temperature changes, managed to speak despite her weakened condition. The temperature fluctuations we experienced earlier would be fatal to most known species. How did you function normally during those extremes? David paused in his work, genuinely trying to think of how to explain it. I grew up in Arizona, where summer temperatures hit 120 degrees pretty regularly. And I worked construction in Alaska for a few years where it got down to 40 below zero. You just dress appropriately and stay hydrated. The alien stared at him in stunned silence. What David was describing as normal weather patterns were temperature extremes that would require environmental suits and life support systems for most galactic species. Your home world experiences natural temperature variations of 160 degrees. Asked Thokran, his warrior composure finally cracking. Without technological intervention? Oh, that's nothing, Jake added helpfully. Death Valley gets up to 134 degrees, and some places in Antarctica hit minus 128, though I guess most people don't live in those spots year-round. Lieutenant Amy Foster, the third human in their group, had been quietly tending to the injured aliens. She looked up from her medical work and joined the conversation. The atmospheric pressure here feels pretty normal to me. It's like being at sea level back home. I grew up in Denver, which is a mile high, so this actually feels thick and easy to breathe. Impossible, whispered Cadet Yelnov. The atmospheric readings show pressure variations that would cause decompression sickness in most species. Amy shrugged. I've been hiking at 14,000 feet, where the air is so thin you can barely breathe. This feels fine. As the humans continued their rescue efforts, more details about their homeworld began to emerge, each revelation more shocking than the last. The electrical storm earlier reminded me of tornado season back in Kansas, David mentioned while jury-rigging their communications equipment. We get these supercell thunderstorms that could generate lightning strikes every few seconds for hours. Your planet has electrical storms powerful enough to sustain continuous lightning. Mortek's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, yeah. Some storms generate more electrical energy than entire power grids. We just stay inside and wait for them to pass. Jake was working on their water recycling system when he added. And then there's hurricane season. Those storms can be 500 miles across with wind speeds over 200 miles per hour. They carry the energy equivalent of several nuclear weapons. The alien cadets were looking at the humans with expressions of pure terror now. What they were describing wasn't a planet that supported life. It was a world that seemed designed to eliminate it. How did your species survive evolutionary development on such a hostile world? Asked Zilera, her voice taking on the academic tone she used when trying to understand impossible concepts. Amy looked up from the injured Altarian she was treating. Well, we had to deal with predators too. Bears that can weigh 800 pounds and run 35 miles per hour. Big cats that can leap 40 feet and bite through bone. Wolves that hunt in coordinated packs and can track prey for hundreds of miles. And don't forget the smaller stuff, David added. Venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, disease-carrying insects. Oh, and sharks. We share our oceans with predators that have remained essentially unchanged for 400 million years because they're already perfect killing machines. Thakran, whose people prided themselves on being the galaxy's greatest warriors, was staring at David with something approaching awe. Your planet tried to kill you every single day, and your species not only survived but thrived enough to develop space travel. David paused in his work, genuinely puzzled by the question. I guess so. Never really thought about it much. I mean, everyone deals with their local environment, right? You just learn to be careful and adapt to whatever conditions you're born into. Most species evolve on worlds with stable climates, predictable weather patterns, and minimal predation, explained Yelna quietly. Worlds where the greatest environmental challenge might be seasonal variation in daylight hours. That sounds kind of boring, Jay commented. Half the fun of being outdoors is dealing with whatever nature throws at you. Keeps you alert. The aliens exchanged looks of dawning horror. They were beginning to understand that humans hadn't just survived on a death world. They had evolved to find constant mortal danger entertaining. The implications of that realization were staggering. Your species considers environmental hazards to be recreational activities. Mortek said slowly, as if trying to comprehend an impossible concept. Amy nodded cheerfully while checking the life signs of their injured companions. Extreme sports are pretty popular back home. Rock climbing, whitewater rafting, skydiving, mountain climbing. People pay good money to put themselves in dangerous situations just for the adrenaline rush. The alien cadet sat in stunned silence, finally understanding why the humans had functioned normally during what should have been a fatal emergency. This wasn't just luck or superior training. This was what humans were built for. When emergency rescue teams finally cut through the blast doors of Section 7, they expected to find a scene of devastation. Instead, they discovered all 12 cadets alive and relatively well, with the 3 humans appearing completely unaffected by their ordeal. David Thompson was actually helping the medical team carry stretchers, while Jake Wilson and Lieutenant Amy Foster were calmly explaining the situation to the emergency coordinators. Dr. Cathera ran every medical scan she could think of on the human cadets. Their vital signs were completely normal. No signs of toxic exposure, no cellular damage from temperature extremes, no stress indicators that would be expected after surviving such conditions. It was as if they had spent the night in comfortable quarters rather than a section of the station that had nearly become uninhabitable. Within 6 hours of the rescue, the incident report was making its way up to the Academy's administrative chain. Commander Zeph found himself staring at medical readings that didn't make sense, survivor testimonies that seemed impossible, and growing questions about everything they thought they knew about humans. Pull the complete files on Earth and its inhabitants, he ordered his staff. I want everything we have, including the original survey reports. What they discovered changed everything. Buried deep in bureaucratic databases, processed years earlier by junior administrators who barely glanced at incoming applications, were the original xenobiology reports on Earth. The planet had been classified as a Class 12 death world, unsuitable for most known forms of life. Someone had marked it as a clerical error. After all, how could an intelligent species evolve on a world that hostile? The classification had been quietly changed to marginally habitable, and humans had been processed as just another primitive species seeking admission to galactic civilization. The news spread through Galactic Academy Station like wildfire. In the faculty lounge, instructors huddled around data tablets, reading reports that made their blood run cold. Earth wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of world that most species would classify as a weapon of mass destruction if someone tried to terraform it. Look at this, whispered Professor Yathron, her tentacles trembling as she scrolled through climate data. Their weather systems regularly generate storms with the energy output of fusion reactors, and their inhabitants consider this normal. Dr. Morvac, the station's xenobiology expert, was reviewing evolutionary data with growing horror. According to these genetic analyses, humans didn't just survive on this death world. They thrive there. Their entire physiology is adapted for conditions that would sterilize most planets we know. In the cadet dormitories, word was spreading just as quickly. Alien students who had mocked the humans just days before were now looking at them with expressions ranging from awe to outright fear. The casual conversations about Earth that had seemed like primitive boasting now took on a terrifying new meaning. Thakran sat on his bunk, staring at his human roommate David, who was calmly doing homework as if nothing had changed. The Krugan warriors people prided themselves on being the galaxy's fiercest fighters, bred on a high-gravity world where only the strong survived. But even their home world seemed like a peaceful garden compared to the nightmare planet these humans called home. "David," he said quietly, "when you told me about those creatures called grizzly bears, you said they were common near your hometown." "Yeah, we'd see them pretty regularly during camping trips," David replied without looking up from his tactical studies. "You just make sure to store your food properly and give them plenty of space. They're not usually aggressive unless you surprise them or get between a mother and her cubs." Thakran's warrior composure finally cracked completely. These predators weigh nearly half a ton, can run faster than most vehicles, and have claws that can tear through metal. And your people camp in their territory for recreation. David finally looked up, genuinely confused by his roommate's tone. "Well, yeah, it's not that dangerous if you know what you're doing. We have safety protocols." Across the station, Instructor Veltar was having his own crisis of understanding. He found himself watching David during morning formation, no longer seeing a primitive species try and play soldier. Instead, he was looking at a creature that had been forged by evolutionary pressures that would have driven most species extinct before they developed basic tools. After morning drill, Veltar called David aside. The instructor's skin had been cycling through colors of confusion and concern all week. "Thompson, I need to ask you about yesterday's training exercise," he began carefully. "The one in Environmental Chamber 7, where we simulated extreme hazard conditions." David nodded. "Sure, sir. What about it?" The atmospheric composition included corrosive compounds. The temperature swung from near freezing to 180 degrees, and the pressure variations should have caused immediate physiological distress in most species. "Okay," David replied, waiting for the actual question. Veltar paused, trying to find words for what he was thinking. "How did those conditions feel to you?" David considered this for a moment. "Pretty comfortable, actually. Reminded me of a spring morning in Seattle, except maybe a bit drier. The temperature swings weren't too bad, kind of like the difference between indoors and outdoors during a normal day back home." The instructor felt his skin shift to the deep purple that indicated profound distress among his people. He was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their military tactics. It was their complete inability to recognize just how absolutely terrifying they were. In the weeks that followed, applications from human candidates began receiving very different treatment. Academy administrators were quietly reviewing every aspect of their admission policies. The casual dismissal of Earth as a primitive backwater was replaced by urgent discussions about how to handle students from what was essentially a planet-sized military training facility. Other cadets started treating the humans with a mixture of respect and barely controlled fear. The sight of David Thompson casually jogging through environmental conditions that required life support equipment for most species became a daily reminder that humans were not what they seemed. The galaxy's perception of humanity was shifting rapidly. What had once been seen as a weak, primitive species was now understood to be the product of evolutionary pressures that would have eliminated most known forms of life. Earth wasn't just another inhabited world. It was a forge that had created something unprecedented in galactic history. And the most terrifying part was that the humans themselves had no idea how frightening they truly were. They continued to approach their training with the same casual attitude they brought to everything else, completely unaware that their very existence was rewriting everything the galaxy thought it knew about what was possible.